Good morning. Lots of teaching in our readings this Sunday, particularly in our gospel, so rather than tackle it all, I just want to zero in on this little passage on divorce and unlawful marriage. Hear it again. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a bill of divorce. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, this just isn't a nice phrase or saying. This is Jesus teaching as God, as he's deepening the commandments that he, in the Old Testament, as the Word, gave to Moses and Moses gave to us. And he's telling us that this is all still in place. Now, I'm not sure in 2026 that we really understand the gravity of how this would have been received. He's essentially claiming to be Moses. We can even take it a step further. Those who heard him speaking like this would have said, he's basically making himself equal to God. A modern equivalent would be if I got up as his representative and said, hey, you heard Jesus say this, but what I'm going to tell you. You might say, well, if you're changing it, who are you? So let's just go back and put the whole thing together across a very vast timeline, because what the Lord is addressing, in fact, goes all the way back to Moses. Now, initially, Moses taught that marriage between one man and one woman was permanent and lifelong. But as they made their way through the desert journey on their way to the promised land, they ran into a very, very serious issue. And it was that when a man became displeased with his wife, because he was unable to leave her, being that Moses taught this permanence, that he took her out into the desert and he murdered her. And when she was not around and people asked, all he would say is, I don't know where she went. She simply disappeared. And we have to remember on a lot of right issues, like civil rights, equality, we are living in a very privileged time, a very unique time, because this has not been the case for most of human history, particularly at this juncture in the history of the Jews. One could easily get away with this. It's actually a really good point. The next person that tells you that, the Catholic Church is too machismo and run by men. If it was not for Jesus' teaching and subsequent doctrine in the Catholic Church, all these rights that we enjoy would not exist. The church has been on the front lines of these rights, despite what the culture might tell you, for a very long time. So when Moses became aware that this was going on, later on, the Lord will say it this way, Moses gave you the bill of divorce because your hearts were hard. Well, that gives a whole new meaning to hardness of heart. Moses had to do something about it, so he made an exception with this bill of divorce. Man could write this bill of divorce out, hand it to his wife, and she had to leave the home. The only rule was he could never remarry her. And for 1,300 years or so of Jewish history, this was the approach to marriage. And now the Lord, as God, is going to give us in real truth and clarity in several different sections of the gospel what marriage really is, how he created it to be. So for example, in Matthew chapter 19, 3-9, he goes all the way back to the book of Genesis, skips over all the modern squabble, and he just simply says, look, what God has joined together, no human can separate. Doesn't matter whether you like it, how you feel about it. Once a man and a woman's souls are joined together, the only thing that breaks that bond is death. And we know that because later on he says that there is no marriage in heaven. And therefore we can conclude that death is the end of that bond. Now, a lot of happily married couples will be like, well, Father, will we share something? I'm sure you'll share something very special in heaven, having lived your whole life together, having brought eternal souls into existence together. I don't see how that works any other way. But marriage as we know it will not be there. He also throws in this caveat, though, that is very, very important. And he says, unless the marriage is unlawful. Now, if we look at the Greek in that, the word that he uses is porneia, which actually is our word for pornographic, which means that there is something so wrong with this marriage that it actually is just the opposite of what marriage is. It's not a marriage at all. Just like pornography is the very opposite of what marital lovemaking should be. So let's just summarize it before we move on. Christ teaches that what God joins together, the souls of a man and woman, cannot be separated by any human institution or human. The only thing that separates that bond is death, if in fact God joined the souls. However, there are cases where God did not join the souls of the man and the woman at their marriage because something was unlawful or really wrong about the union that God could see from the beginning that maybe we couldn't. So why is this so important to us? This teaching is monumentally important, especially right now in our history, because it explains how the church can teach the permanence of marriage, that it's a lifelong union that cannot be separated except by death. Well, at the same time, it explains how in some cases, after a divorce has happened, why the church is able to rule that marriage, or that particular marriage, was null. Not at that moment, but from the very beginning, because there was something that was wrong with it that God could see that we can't, that we see now, which means that marriage bond never happened. And that's very important for us to understand. This isn't a Catholic divorce. There was no marriage. That's where it gets real black and white. There was no marriage, or if there was a marriage, nothing can break that bond but death. Okay, with that foundation in place, I want to conclude with three very important points. One is just a brief explanation on the annulment process in the Catholic Church. First, a divorce must take place, after which both parties petition the church to examine the bond of marriage to determine whether or not the marriage was actually valid. Now, one party might say, yeah, I want to do this. The other one doesn't care. Fine. The other one doesn't even need to be a part of it. One can just put that into motion. They call the party that doesn't respond a hostile objector. Now, this is a very serious and thorough process that the church takes incredibly seriously. And so two canon lawyers, church lawyers, one representing invalidity, one representing validity, will build their cases based upon a whole process that takes place. And then they take this case to trial. They try the marriage. One trying to prove it invalid, the other trying to prove it valid. And a subsequent decision after this lengthy process is then rendered. If the marriage is determined to be valid, although the couple may remain separated, they are still validly married and they cannot remarry unless one of them dies. I want to throw a teaching from the Code of Canon Law, our legal system, in. that says you are not expected to remain in a marriage, even if it's valid, if you are being abused, physically or emotionally or mentally. Get out. Yesteryear's old contract thing that we used to talk about. Marriage is a covenant of love, and if that's being violated in a violent way, you have the right to leave, whether you can remarry or not. On the other end, if the marriage is determined to be null or invalid, they are free to marry because, once again, they have never been married. So couples that are in this situation that could go on to get married again, they don't have to say, well, in my former marriage, they never were married. It was a relationship, but it was not a marriage. Now, this can be incredibly healing for people, and it is. I've seen it. Because the reason why the marriage failed is because it wasn't a marriage. Simple as that. And God actually has someone else in mind for you, and that was not who he had in mind for you. Grace was not with it, hence separation. We can even take it a step farther and conclude that that was not God's will, and that's okay. And that the person that you find in the future actually is God's will for you. Second, we might be wondering at this point, what are some reasons that the church determines that a marriage is invalid? And there are many, especially in the times that we're living in. The easiest way to understand this is what we call lack of form. So if you got married outside the church without the church's permission, it's clearly an invalid marriage. You got married at the courthouse, not valid. Or you got married in a Protestant church without the church's permission. So a couple could come to the priest and say, we're going to go through the Catholic formation process. We promise to raise our children Catholic. And the bishop then gives permission to be married in a Protestant church. And contrary to popular belief, you do not need to have a priest there. The Protestant minister can validly witness the wedding. But if you don't have that in place, lack of form, invalid. Second, maybe you were forced or coerced into the marriage. The best way to understand this is the old shotgun wedding, right? Got her pregnant and dad's like, now you're going to marry her, boy. No, I don't want to. I got a shotgun in the back room. But there's a lot of things that can force someone into this that no one knows about, that later come to light. Too many to even be discussed in this lengthy homily. There's psychological things that can get into the way that aren't known or revealed at the time of the wedding or in the relationship. Fourth, one of the parties or both don't intend the essential properties of marriage as taught by Jesus and the Catholic Church. So they don't intend to have children. They don't intend a lifelong marriage, or they don't even understand what that means in our modern day and age. Now even, they might totally and absolutely be for and believe in same-sex unions. That's not what God teaches about marriage. And if that's what you think marriage is, then you don't know marriage. Certain conditions can block the marriage altogether. We call them impediments. So, for example, a person was married before, they don't have an invalidity declared, and they try to contract marriage. They can't. Priest tries to get married, clearly invalid. And many, many others. There was a grave deception. So the person has a mental illness diagnosis that they don't reveal. The couple gets married only for a year later to find out this person has this and they knew nothing about it. One of the parties is in an affair or cheats on the person, doesn't reveal it. The couple gets married, this comes to light afterwards, clearly invalid. The person's like $700,000 in debt. Doesn't tell their future spouse. They get married. A year later, this comes to light. And they say, I would have never married you had I known this. Invalid. And many, many others. Finally, I want to end with addressing a massive demonic lie that keeps people who have separated from going through the annulment process, and it is this. Not so much still in our time, but it's still here. But it's from yesteryear. If my marriage is determined to be invalid, then my children were born out of wedlock, and in some way this lessens their dignity. This is absolutely straight out of hell. Hear me. God, the Catholic Church and its doctrine, and every other teaching that exists unequivocally states that every human life that is conceived is holy and sacred to the Lord, a son and daughter of the Most High God, made in his image and likeness, no matter how the conception happened. That soul is equal to every other soul that has ever existed. So although your children came from your union, they are not your union. They are separate from that. And their dignity is derived from God himself, not from what you did or didn't do. Anything less than this belief is from Satan himself. And years ago, in the church, there's a whole movement even in the clergy where you brought in a child born out of wedlock, and it was like, I'm not, and this is the most disgusting thing that could be ever said about a human person, I'm not going to baptize your bastard child. What? And we wonder why we have an issue with abortion. I had a woman tell me a story years ago in seminary about that, and it still disgusts me to this day that she was treated the way that she was. God loves your marriages. God loves your families, whatever they look like. Because that's where the fullness of love on earth exists. It's where we learn love. In a very real way, from a natural sense, the family is the word for God in the human race. And let us not forget that the fullness of love comes with sacrifice. So if you're struggling as a married couple, or with your kids, or in your priesthood, that's the way it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be easy. Because the fullness of love is the cross. And nothing good in this life comes without suffering. If you are a person who is separated or even separated and remarried, it needs an annulment, please come talk to me. I've walked with a lot of people. I want to help you. And it's much easier than what you think, and a very healing process to get this right with the church and God. God loves you. He's not disappointed in you. And he wants to heal your situation. As we come to receive Holy Communion today, offer a prayer for your marriage and thank God for your marriage. Tell your spouse that you love him today. And let us most especially pray for all those who are struggling.